I've done other, I would almost call it experimental animation, where Richter, but I can't think of his first name, Mr. Richter, who's an animator here. And I love his animation. He did some stuff I did working with the Methodist Church. I am the voice, along with another guy, with the voice of the Wesleyan brothers on a sort of an alternative cartoon they were trying to do to promote within the church. It didn't take off the way that they wanted it to, but they're still using it. In fact, we recorded one like a month or two ago. We recorded another shorter one, but they were trying to make it a series, like an ongoing thing, which we were all on board for. Long story short, Mr. Richter had us over to his studio, which is in Marathon Village here, which has got several artistic studios. And I was fascinated. As an animator, he was actually doing a thing where he was going to do a commercial for a business that had not hired him. It was an attempt to get their business. It's a really nice butcher that is here in town. We were voicing meats. So we were the voice for, a pork roast, voice for meatballs. And it was one of the funnest experiences I think I've ever had, because he just had us over to his studio on like a Saturday night. He ordered pizza and he had beers, and we sat there drinking a little beer and eating pizza. And he would go, okay, you're two meatballs and you're in a fight. We got to do all this improv. It was absolutely fascinating.
Welcome back to the What's the Big Idea podcast, the podcast that talks to associates of Big Idea Productions about life before, during, and after VeggieTales. This time, it's non-stop talk about VeggieTales, Bibleman, and even more. Let's jump right back in to a day in the life of Henry Haggard.
The film has very mature subject matter. I'll say this, I read a lot of screenplays, and so what stood out for me, one of the reasons I was so attracted to it and didn't think I'd get it even, is because the screenplay was so good. I'm friends with the screenplay writer now. He's out in LA, but I'm Facebook friends and we chat occasionally. What an awesome guy. But it's his story. And it's heartbreaking. He is a gay man, out of the closet gay man, but he did not come out of the closet until he was in his 50s. And so Robin Williams' character in the film is that as well. He is, living a life that was fraudulent, I suppose you could say. And this is about the moment in time in his 50s. And, you give the overview of it, it sounds like it's very licentious, but not really. The relationship he has, he comes across a male prostitute on the Boulevard. They filmed it in Nashville, of course, but they wanted it to be like any city, USA, really. He meets this young man. There's an incident where the young man hits his car or something, and he ends up giving him a ride back to a hotel. And when I was reading it for the first time, of course, I was like, oh my gosh, she's going to, take this male prostitute. He's going to go have sex with this male prostitute. But they don't. But the prostitute thinks that's what's going to happen. And what ends up happening is they form this relationship that's not sexual. And you get the sense from Robin Williams' character that he actually mourning what could have been for him, not in terms of being a prostitute, but being an out of the closet, living his true self. And that resounded with me, although I am not gay. I have many friends in the industry who are. My best friend from college, I was with him for his coming out in the early 80s, and it was difficult, especially back then. I think it's difficult now still in our society. And I thought this film had really great things to say about that. Really, really mature, pondering things, because it's really never too late to start over. And that's essentially how the film ends. It's got such depressing material in it, but at the end of the day, it's uplifting, because the way the film ends, you see him living his new life as his true self. His wife that he was married to for so long, and I believe that Douglas Sosby is the screenplay writer. I'm uncertain if he was actually married or not, but I think maybe he was. But he and his wife stayed friends. His ex-wife, they stayed friends after. She had no animosity or any, thing toward him. They didn't have children, and that's in the movie. That relationship is really interesting. And in fact, the very first day they filmed, I was not in this scene, but when they're filming at his character's house, they found out from the lady asked what the film was about, and she said, oh my God, that's what happened to me and my husband. So that was weird. But it also, too, the reason Ditto said he was attracted to it is because his mom and dad were married for like 50 years and they got a divorce. His dad wasn't gay or anything, but his parents divorced. And he said that just shook his world. He was like, how could you be married for 50 years and divorce after 50 years of marriage? You're in your 70s. And it blew him away. So he looked at the script and was like, life changes can occur in your elder years. Don't ever think that your story is done, that you are what you are right now. Things change. And I like that aspect of it as well. Bob Odenkirk is also in the film, who I absolutely adore, but I didn't work with him at all. I just got to meet him. Now him, I fanned out on some. When I met him, I teased him a little bit, walked out of my trailer. I made the AD, I asked the assistant director to let me know when Bob Odenkirk got to set. And she did. She came to my trailer, knocked on the door and said, Bob Odenkirk's on set. And so I walked out my door and I said, Bob Odenkirk. And he turned around and looked at me like, who the heck is this guy? And I said, welcome to Nashville. Bob Odenkirk, this is, Better Call Saul is what most people probably know him for these days, but he's also on a very silly, funny show called Mr. Show that he did with one of my favorite comedians, David Cross. I just walked down and shook his hand, and he said, "Who are you, the mayor of Nashville?" And of course, I laughed. I think he's a very funny man. And I just got to say, "I wish I was doing a scene with you." And he said, "I wish so too." And we walked away. He asked me about Nashville a little bit, and he walked on. I got to spend, those hours with Robin talking about the material. A lot of people asked this question. This is a year prior to his passing, but there was no indication whatsoever. People ask me all the time, could you tell? No. He was very wrapped up in this role, and some of the film is very depressing and very, very emotional. So he sometimes could seem whatever, but I really think that was the absorption of his character, because when the cameras were turned off, he was Robin Williams. I got about 3 of the funniest personalized monologues, stand-up comedy routines from Robin Williams that nobody else could hear. At one point when we both were on a break, we were sitting beside one another, and he was sitting next to me, and he was whispering this virtually. I don't remember a thing he said, but he just starts doing the Robin Williams thing. Free association, crazy, crazy things. And it was all country music stuff too, which I don't know, something about a possum. And I sat there and giggled like a fool for probably, whatever. We were sitting back in this little cubby. The crew kept poking there, seeing what I was laughing at. And because they couldn't hear what he was saying. And so I looked like a crazy person just sitting next to Robin Williams laughing. I am told, that film, I was on 5 days, and that was a 22-day shoot. It was quick. I have friends that were on the crew, and they tell me that he did that many times for the entire crew. We shot a scene at a steakhouse where my character was the stodgy boss who, at first, they had made him more of a homophobic character, but they lessened that, which I liked. He still was not somebody who would have approved of that in any way. He wasn't evil, right? They made him more of a human guy. Within the world of the film, Robin Williams' character had been a great employee up to this moment in his life, and suddenly he's involved with this male prostitute, which of course is associated with drug dealers who come to the bank and make a scene within the film. All of that is to say, working on that kind of work, and I wasn't part of the emotional plot line, but I was Robin Williams' boss. It's in my reel, if you watched it, where I curse him out, which was a tremendous amount of fun. And in fact, on that day, I wouldn't call it a disagreement, but we were disappointed in the way the director wanted us to shoot it. And so Ditto had walked off. And of course, a director on a film like that, even that was a low budget film for $4 million, but probably one of the biggest budgeted films I'd ever been. $4 million. And he's got all these bells and whistles going. Both of us were disappointed. And I looked over at Robin and I said, "I thought we would be closer." And he goes, "I did too." And I said, "I never would have dreamed of asking the director to accommodate that. But Robin Williams is Robin Williams." And he said, "Hey, Ditto, do you mind if we do it closer in?" And Ditto said, "Oh, no, let's do that. Let's do that." And so we got to shoot it that way. And I thought, wow, that was a major little collaboration. I was one of the guys there for a minute. It was very nice. So it gave me a tremendous amount of career justification. For lack of a better term. So I've always maintained, I was like, look, famous people and people, talents like Robin Williams, there's no question they're so talented. At the same time, I chose not to live in a big city, and I knew that not living in a big city, at least at the time that I was making that decision, probably meant that I wouldn't be famous. But I don't think I ever started to become an actor to become famous. In fact, now at 60 years old, I would argue, I think it would be more of a pain in the butt than it would be a reward. Or something that I would desire, are the ones I think that achieve that kind of success a little bit later, at least like by their 30s. But even like, Morgan Freeman, he was on some pretty famous shows, and he's been in pretty famous films before he was super famous, but he really didn't become super famous until he was well into his 40s, possibly his 50s. I can't remember exactly. But Morgan Freeman is probably one of the biggest stars in the world now. So, you never know what's going to happen as far as that goes. But I think I would balk at, especially now with media and multimedia and social media the way it is, I don't think I would want that amount of scrutiny or attention. I think it would unnerve me slightly. But I loved studying it and being next to it, that's for sure. So Boulevard really handed me that opportunity. They premiered the film at the very famous festival, Tribeca Film Festival. They were, they put out the thing, "Come and join us," and I was like, I knew that other people in the film who had much more clout than I did, although they didn't have as big a role as I did. Finally, I got educated. And how does that happen? Why did they got all expenses paid? Well, it was in their contract. I didn't, like I aforementioned, I didn't have a manager, and my agent wasn't going to, at that time, was not going to negotiate something like that. He wants a all paid trip, free trip to New York with accommodation, to hang out. So I could have gone if I paid for it myself, but an impromptu trip like that was not in my budget. So I did not go. And I don't feel like I missed out. When they premiered it in Nashville, I did go to that. Robin wasn't here, but Roberto Aguirre, who plays the young man in the film, was here. And we went out to where they do the Nashville Film Festival, and I got to go sit on the panel with Ditto and Roberto, and that was awesome. I did get to say goodbye to Robin. My last day on set was with him. We shot at the steakhouse. When I walked in, I had the glory of Robin Williams screaming my name and running over and hugging and then joking around. And that blew me away. We hadn't seen each other in about a week or 2 weeks. And so that was a lot of fun. And then we have our very awkward encounter in the restaurant. And so the restaurant also had a lot of extras, or what I think they call now background actors. And suddenly everybody, when Robin Williams jumps out of a chair and screams your name and runs over and hugs you, everybody wants to know who you are. And so some guy sidled up to me and said, who are you? And I told him, and they were like, where do you live? And I said, I live right here. That was great fun. So all in all, a great experience.
The one thing that I wanted to ask was sort of a spin-off of people asking you about, whether you saw it in Robin. How did it feel that you were involved with one of his last projects before he left this earth?
Yeah, not his absolute last, but it was one of his last films, wasn't it? Well, it's mixed, right? Absolutely. His talent was stolen from us far too early. I think he would have had a lot to do. But I also know, after doing some deeper reading and talking to some people who knew him a little bit better than I did, which I didn't know him at all. You work with somebody once, you don't really get to know them. I would say I had all my encounters, it was never awkward or weird. He was such a sweet man. But reading into what he was, Lewy body syndrome that he was diagnosed with, and reading more heavily into that, Lewy body syndrome also causes your brain to kind of go crazy. You're not thinking rationally. I don't think he was fully himself when he took his own life. I guess you could argue that nobody is when they make a decision like that. But reading interviews with people who knew him very well, his wife in particular, does not think he would have committed suicide if he did not have Lewy body syndrome. Some people make the argument that he did that because it was horrifying what he was going to go through. And it's not pretty. When you read about how one dies from a disease like that, it's not good, and especially not for an actor, because it's a type of dementia that makes you unrecognizable to people who knew you. And I think he certainly wanted to avoid that. But his wife maintains that if he had hung around, he would have tried to have worked through therapies, and he had the resources enough to probably have things that would have helped, although there's not much you can do with somebody who's got that. So some people in our culture, especially, people are a little judgmental sometimes towards people who choose suicide. But I always say, well, you don't know what was going through somebody's mind. So I was very sad, of course, to lose him as a person, but as an artist and the gift he was to the world, was very sad. The emotions were mixed as far as that goes. I think the film would have been a little more prominent and gotten a little bit better attention. I read one review that I thought was so interesting, because it said the film was too much like a film from the 70s. And to me, that was the whole point, that it was more like a film from the 70s. It's more of a European style film, where it's just a slice of life from this guy with a very interesting story and very human relationships of a very realistic and oft repeated situation that happens in society still, with broader themes towards how we perceive ourselves and how that translates to the rest of the world. Because, inside our heads, we're all the same inside our heads as far as that goes. As being an actor, is you have to create a certain amount of body awareness, and of course awareness in general, to pull off characters. Otherwise, if you don't know what that looks like or what you look like, how can you contrast that? If I'm playing a guy from Brooklyn, I'm going to have to know what that sort of looks and sounds like, right? Several of us who were involved locally with Boulevard, of course, talked that day. A lot of my friends my family reached out. It was very sad. He has a brother that I'm sure still lives in Memphis. Robin Williams' brother lives in Memphis. I did not know that. And I know that because he had a couple of times where he wasn't called to set for a few days. He would go to Memphis, which is about 3 hours away from Nashville, to go spend time. They came and visited him here once, because he did ask me for recommendations about where to go eat and things to do in Nashville. At the end of the day, I think if he had stuck around, I think he would have been able to bring the attention to the film that it deserved. I'm not mad about it, though, as far as that goes. It's one of his last projects, so it's noted that way. There are people who did not like it because of the subject matter, but there's people who didn't like it as a film. In general, I think it's a really good film. I think Ditto did a really tremendous job. I had very little to do with any of that, so I don't feel like I'm tooting my own horn at all. But certainly Bob Odenkirk's performance, the actress whom I love, her name's out of my head right now, that played his wife. She comes from theater, too. I actually bonded with her, and I had a day on a set with her that I didn't have with Robin Williams. Kathy, and I cannot think of her last name. It's just going on. I always get her.
Kathy Baker.
Thank you. I always want to call her Kathy Bates. And I go, no, that's not right. That's not Kathy Bates. Thank you so much, Reziel. We shot this thing. Robin Williams was supposed to show up at the house, but he never shows. And so we shot at this really weird mansion that I've been driving by and still drive by to this day, that's in my neighborhood, not too far away. And we were driving around that building all the time. And I always wondered what it was like to be inside it. And we spent the entire day, one very, very hot summer day in that building with Kathy Baker's sweet husband was there as well. And he and I are around the same age. And so we hit it off and sat back and talked and everything. All of those experiences, those people that bonded over that, it affected the world at large, but it affected anybody who probably ever worked with Robin Williams, I would say. But the upside of that is at least we got him for a little while, and we got him to, he was in his 60s. And, although ideally he would have stuck around for at least another 15, 20 years. That's where we all wind up eventually. We're all warm food at the end of the day, to put it in a little bit of a Shakespearean term. So, it's very sad in that way. What an amazing life he had. What an amazing talent. But he had lots of struggles. He wasn't silent about those struggles. He struggled with addiction when he was younger. And, who knows if that led to his Lewy body dementia or not. First thing when I read the article about it, about the chemical imbalances of what occurs in your body and your brain for Lewy body dementia, I thought, wow, I wonder if that has anything to do with cocaine use. He eventually kicked all that. He had an open heart surgery. He had a heart attack, which was absolutely, he believed anyway, was related to his drug use in the 70s and 80s. And all those guys that came up on Saturday Night Live, they abuse all the drugs, especially when you make a lot of money. I mentioned my brother earlier, and full disclosure, my brother died of an overdose. He was not a famous person, and he never was able to kick that. When my father passed, he left us the house, and we divided that, and we gave him his inheritance, and we tried to keep it so that we could give it to him in increments, and he took it all. And it wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough money to kill yourself with. And that's what I was afraid he would do, and that's basically what he did. He got an apartment by himself and he OD'd. While it was an accident, we think, we can't know that. And I think that's the same thing with Robin Williams, although he did not OD. It leaves a lot of questions. I wish I could ask him some of those questions, that's for sure. But I think if he had stuck around, I think he could have done the marketing. Roberto Aguirre, Bob Odenkirk, Kathy Baker, none of them are stars of enough impact to really have sold that film, but they didn't really put any effort into that themselves. It's not a criticism. That's just, they all three very busy people. I think Robin Williams, with a couple of talk show appointments, might have given it a little bit more oomph. It would be interesting. There's no way to know what it would have been like had he not passed, but that would very, very much be interesting to find out.
Let's switch the subject to the one that...
Sure. Happy. You can edit.
Oh, no, I'm going to keep that in. I don't care. I don't care if we're going to temporarily call it What's the Boulevard or something like that. That was amazing.
Right on.
I love hearing experiences like this, even if they aren't VeggieTales related. But yeah, let's get back on track with VeggieTales and whatnot. So
right on.
Recount all your VeggieTales stuff. Let's go.
Sure. Well, that's shorter because, you record those in studio and you're not there very long. I was probably in that studio 5 or 6 times. I think I spanned 3 episodes, but the Christmas episode I wasn't in. I was a narrator for that episode. They ended up replacing me with Uncle Si from Duck Dynasty, which is one of my favorite things to tell people. I still got paid. So, I mean, it was not a big deal. And I'd found out later that Uncle Si, as nice a man as he might be, what I had recorded in about 6 hours, they couldn't get Uncle Si in 3 days. So later on, I was like, score 1 for the actor. That origin story is kind of fun. A friend of a friend that worked on VeggieTales. So one of the guys that was, I think he was a producer for VeggieTales, knew a good friend of mine, and they could not find an actor to do a Scottish accent, a local. They do almost all their own voices in-house for the most part. They guest some people in. It's in the dozens if it's that many. My friends who have been on VeggieTales had smaller roles than I had, most of them that I talked to. So I was always fascinated with it. It was just stuff either they couldn't do. I mean, obviously the female voices, if they wanted to keep it a natural female voice, they're going to hire a female to do that. And Mike and those guys are not going to do it. But anyway, so it was my favorite audition story because it was like this. It was so casual. My friend Denise texts me and says, would you like to audition for VeggieTales? And I said, sure. What are they? And she said, they need somebody quick. And I think quick in those days was, maybe I think I was in studio like not even 2 days later. And that is really quick. Usually it's several weeks past the casting time that you're actually starting the project. I said, well, what do they want? She said, well, I'll just give you his email. The producer texts me and he says, here's, 3 pages of a script. We want a Scottish dialect. There's music. Don't worry about that. Just, read this role. And it was Chog Norrius. And it might have been called something different at that point. I don't think they had settled on the character's name yet. And so I got it, and I'd never really seen VeggieTales. As I mentioned before, I don't have children, but I have friends who do. I was aware it existed. That was about it, though. So I called my friend whose son was super into VeggieTales and asked a few questions. And then I sat down with the script, and I recorded it on my iPhone. They said, just record it on your iPhone. We're not worried about it. And I said, that's awesome. So I recorded it on my iPhone, but I did all the Scottish accents in it. I did. When I turned it in, I just had fun with it because I love doing little radio plays where I do all the voices anyway. And so I did all the voices, and I didn't know what the music was, but I made up my own music to the music. I recorded that and I sent it to them. And it's my favorite thing because 5 minutes later, I got the email, "You're hired. Can you be in studio such and such day at such and such time?" And I did. And I didn't know what a big deal it was until I got there. You know, their facilities that they were using at the time were state of the art, really nice studios, all kinds of food hanging around, all kinds of, you know, break rooms, places you could go nap if you needed to. I didn't need any of those things, really. I worked with the editor at that time, was still one of my favorite editors, sound editors that I've ever worked with. I record with her sometimes for audiobooks. So all of that was just great. Mike Naraki is one of the nicest men I've ever met. He's impossibly tall. Don't know how tall he actually is, but he's probably around 6'6", 6'8". I don't think he's that tall, but 6'6", somewhere up in there. Super nice guy, super accommodating. I mean, like, he brought me up to speed. I told him what I knew and asked him what he wanted. He was so accommodating and nice about it. I got a little bit of chit chat with him off to the side. The other founder, and you'll have to remind me of his name because I only met him once.
Phil Vischer?
Thank you. Yes, they created the world, right? They're both credited with creating the world. And I believe when they sold it, and they're working on the squirrel thing.
Dead Sea Squirrels.
Yes, thank you. My comedy partner on the bus, in fact, is in several of those episodes. I hope to be a part of those at some point. They've recorded their last episode for a while. I don't know if they're going to record more or not. And those guys, they're so creative. They'll move on to something else too. But he walked me through the whole operation on that first day. And I think I was in the studio for 5 hours, and they paid me very handsomely. They were absolutely just such a great experience. In fact, the number they wrote when they told me what they're going to pay me was so large that I had to question it because I thought I read it wrong. And that doesn't happen a lot for me. So, but I went, it sounds like you said this much an hour. That can't be right. And they were like, no, that's what it is. So that was a happy thing. Their process, basically, I stood at a booth that is basically about as big as my studio here in my house. I would say it's probably about like 5 feet by 5 feet. They make sure that you've got plenty of water, a music stand, a spit guard on your mic, and they tell you to go. And the music, I was most nervous about the music because I hadn't heard any of it. And they kept saying, no, we'll sing it line by line. It'll be fine. And they were right. It was no big deal. So the second thing I did with them when I had a song, I knew not to panic about it because they sing it to you, you sing it back. Like I said, I'm a parrot. So that was my ideal situation. What was really wild was watching them edit on the fly because out the booth window, I could see them, what they were doing when we do ADR and things like that, audio digital recordings of, you know, me falling down a hill for 10 minutes. I came in, one of my sessions was probably not even a half an hour that I came in just to make grunts, groans, shouts, exclamations, no words. It was all just, you know, pain, elation, laughing sometimes that, you know, they put into the mishmash of that whole episode, which of course is stunning when you watch it and you go, wow, that is a lot of craftsmanship. One thing in the studio where they had too, walking through with all their animators, I can't remember how many there were, but like, you know, 12 or 15 big screen monitors on these computers with every one of them had a various stage of VeggieTales on them where the animators are working, you know, doing code to create those images. Absolutely amazing. And Mike was super proud of it. It was really cool. And he really enjoyed it. I said, I really don't know much about VeggieTales. Well, come with me. I'm going to give you the tour. And he did. Gave me the nickel tour all the way through. And so I was up to speed. I played Oliver Onion, but I don't remember what episode it was. And I don't think I've seen that one. I just know it's on my resume.
I believe that Oliver Onion was another role that they traded in for another celebrity. I believe it was for the episode Celery Night Fever. Terry Crews, Bruce Onion.
Yep, I believe you're right. Well, they still paid me, so I'm okay. I've got so many friends who've had, you know, wound up back in college. I had a friend who was cast in a movie called Fresh Horses. This is the 80s with two huge stars of the time, up and coming. They were part of what was referred to back then as the Brat Pack. So Molly Ringwald and Andrew McCarthy. He's in this film and he was playing Molly Ringwald's brother. This was a lesson that I was so glad to learn that this was a possibility because you don't think about it. And he had 2 or 3 scenes with Molly Ringwald's character and 1 scene with Andrew McCarthy. He bragged about it to everybody. I mean, he was 18 years old, right out of college. He took his entire family, went to a premiere in Cincinnati to see the film when it came out. And he is not in 1 frame of that film. Of course, he's paid. He's even credited with it. But you will never see the footage of him in that film. But it taught me something because he was devastated. Of course, he took his entire family and friends. He'd been bragging about it for months. They walk in, he's not in 1 frame. So he was devastated. And that's awful. But it taught me a very important lesson that, they can edit you. You know, I shot Boulevard and I told my wife, Evelyn, I would say, you know, honey, I might not, that I won't be in the film. Although when I started looking at some of the scenes, I thought, well, they got to keep that scene. So I thought at the very least I'll have a scene, if not 5 scenes. I've got 5 scenes for it. They didn't cut any of mine. So I was very happy. I tell you though, that's a story repeated so many times. So it's with a badge of honor, especially if it's with VeggieTales, that I can be the guy that was replaced by Uncle Si from Duck Dynasty for the Christmas narration. But yeah, they're great. Those guys, like I said, they're so creative. It's always interesting to hear their pitch for ideas, and especially in the world of animation. I know that they sold it off to a company. I don't know. You guys keep current with it, probably. They're still producing, correct? VeggieTales?
Sort of. So what happened a couple of years ago, by the time that you were in, DreamWorks had already purchased Big Idea.
Oh, that's right.
But then what happened was that DreamWorks wanted to reboot the series, so they made a reboot like a year later after your episode came out, pissed off the entire fandom, and then a year after the reboot. Yeah.
Did they really?
Everybody was completely outraged, including myself and MrLunch. We could go on for hours as to why we did not like the reboot, but
I'm so sorry. Wow.
I mean, it's funny because
well, the writing wouldn't be the same, would it?
no, they had a new team of people who took care of everything. So the voices for the most part were the same. Like they still had Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki doing the key characters, but some characters got replaced and recasted.
Interesting.
But yeah, so around the time that the reboot ended, 2018 Comcast bought DreamWorks, and then 2021 NBC bought Comcast, and then around 2019 was when the VeggieTales show came out. So the show was creating new material, and then they fired Phil Vischer, Mike Naraki in 2021. So now the series is basically doing this weird little audio-only podcast thing.
I wish I had scoop on that. I would love to ask Mike about what happened, because I can't imagine they would but they did fire them?
Yep, completely gone.
Wow. That's really interesting. I want to know the backstory there.
Yeah.
I remember when DreamWorks bought it, and I even talked to the producer that gave me the original call. I think I had written to him, and he told me that he was no longer. That's how I found out. He said he was no longer. Oh, it's when I switched agents, because I said, "Hey, I want to just update you on my agent." He said, "Well, I'm not working with those guys anymore. In fact, Phil and Mike are gone too." That was when they sold it off to DreamWorks, and still. But he said they were still staying on board with voices and stuff and some of that, but they weren't writing anymore and they weren't producing, which is a lot of your time too. And that's what Mike said. I know when I asked the producer, I can't remember if it was Mike I talked to or not. It seems like I did talk to Mike though after the fact, but they were saying, it just eats so much time. And even though they didn't live that far away from the studio, I think they moved to a studio that was closer to their homes. They live and I'm not sure where exactly, but I would imagine that they might even have a studio in their homes. So many people here do have like full-fledged, mostly recording studios just for voiceover and stuff like that, and music. But some people actually have like a full-blown studio where you could shoot a talk show anyway. And of course, a lot of what they do, if it's animation, why not have all of that right on site? Your commute to work would be lovely.
I remember that the only reason why we found this out was because Phil Vischer was talking about it on Twitter, and then that was when like the internet caught on fire when he was talking about it.
I may have been aware of that a little bit. Although I don't do Twitter now, and I was never much of a tweeter. I really could not figure out what Twitter was for in terms of me. I wasn't promoting myself on it. I understood what other like venues and shows, if you had a specific show, and I did that a few times. I think I tweeted about specific shows when I was producing, but I did not care for the platform. It was not my favorite construct of social media. And mostly because what you're talking about is just how it would blow up or become, the main point could get lost on so many things. And that probably describes most of social media anyway. But Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok, you can kind of buffer it from, whatever. I know Facebook, I have my settings. Most of my settings are just with my friends, not for public, although I do some stuff that I open up to public for that very reason. Anyway, fascinating.
Ben wanted me to ask you this question, though. He asked that for the Cy Robertson character that you were supposed to originally play, was that going to be requiring you to redo the voice of Chog Norrius, or was that supposed to be a separate character entirely?
Always meant to be a different character. Yeah. I've not seen the episode, so since I wasn't on it, I don't think I ever watched it. I recorded it, and I don't remember exactly the voice I used, but I think it was I did more of a upper British, we call it Dickensian voice, right? It wasn't really British as much as more a dramatic voice. Yeah, it was not Chog Norris at all. Although that would be funny. And I don't know what Uncle Si did. I would be interested. Probably, I should go look at that.
I mean, honestly, all he basically did was spout puns like 24/7. So you're not really missing all that much.
There we go. Yeah, that doesn't sound like what I was doing at all. That's really funny.
Another Christian property that I remember growing up with as a kid. Super Pro Game Master 2 on Bibleman. What can you tell me about Super Pro Game Master 2 on Bibleman?
Oh my goodness. Those are actually when we first moved to Nashville. So it was very early in my career. And I'm another character in one of those too, the Biblemans. Super Pro Game Master 2 in the old Bibleman series. So I live in East Nashville, as I was just saying, and very close by now it's called Skyway Studio. There's a bunch of things over this way that are called Sky something because there's lots of sort of cool views from semi-mountaintops. But Skyway Studios used to be owned by Pat Robertson. Bibleman was being produced by a company at that time anyway, was being produced by a company out of Franklin. Steve Gilreath was the director's name. The first time I was I can't remember the villain though. The first thing I did for them, I was the villain's sidekick, who was like this sort of, screaming hyena laughing guy. So then Super Pro Game Master 2, and then a friend of mine is Super Pro Game Master 3, because when they called me back to do it again, I was doing something else that made better money. And I said, well, you can pay me more money and I'll come do it. And they said, no. But when I did it, Super Pro Game Master 2 was after Willie Ames left that franchise. I've got a horror film or two that is out there, and one upcoming, actually. And one of the guys I work with, when he found out that I'd done both VeggieTales and Bibleman, he freaked out because as a kid, he grew up watching Bibleman. So he had lots of questions. So they got rid of Willie Ames and they replaced Willie Ames with an actor named Robert Schleck, I think was his name.
Robert T. Schlepp.
Schlepp, that's it. It was an interesting experience. He was like a youth pastor, I think he said. I'm not sure. But he was horribly rude to a friend of mine. And by that,
Please tell us the story. Oh my gosh.
Well, so this is Pete's story to tell, but my buddy Peter Van is an actor who lives here in town. Pete is in his, I'm 60, so Pete's in his early 40s. Pete had to fight with Mr. Schlepp, and Mr. Schlepp did not want to do fight choreography for it. And Pete is a highly trained stage and some film, but mostly stage actor. And they take that stuff very, very seriously. And so Schlepp kept asking him if he knew martial arts. Pete said, no, I don't know martial arts. We're having a sword fight. Let's develop the choreography and so we can do it. And it didn't have to be super realistic or anything. He was like, well, it would help if you knew martial arts. And Pete's like, no, I don't need to know any martial arts. So they get out to shoot the scene, and Robert T. Schlepp ended up, Bibleman had that plastic sword that he had. And I don't think it's the same actor playing him anymore anyway, if they're still producing it. But he ended up knocking the crap out of Pete in the head a couple of times. It's plastic, but it's hard plastic. And so it sort of, made my buddy Pete a little angry. Pete's usually a very nice guy or whatever. So finally, Pete would tell you is that he grew up in Memphis. So, he grew up on the bad side of Memphis. So he knows how to handle himself. And so Robert T. Schlepp, I think he hit him for like the third time he hit him, and Pete grabbed Bibleman's sword out of him and proceeded to just whack him on the butt with it. And the director had to say, stop, and all that stuff. Pete did not get in trouble because Pete said, this guy has hit me in the head, 3 times now. And of course, he's the star. So, and it's supposed to be you're Bibleman. You're supposed to be a Christian. Why do you keep hitting this guy in the head? Anyway, that's a funny story from that. For my part, for Super Pro Game Master, so I look like a Borg from Star Trek is what it's always reminded me of. The makeup and the equipment they put over my head and all that stuff for the cyborg kind of character I was supposed to be, I'm hardly recognizable. The writer for those, Mike Nolan, is still a good friend of mine. And Mike's an awesome guy. I am Christian adjacent. I grew up as a Methodist. I have done a lot of work for Christian entities here. I never say that I'm a religious person. They don't ever ask. That's not, it's about just the acting thing. But of course I do them. There was only one time that I was shooting for an old production company, and I realized I was in an anti-evolution commercial, and it was only being shown at like some kind of Christian camp out in California. But to my horror, we just moved here. We were very poor, and they were paying me $400. I had not really read the script very closely, and I couldn't understand something in the script. I was standing on set on the day of, and I was looking at it, and they said, I said, I don't understand what this means. And they said, they're making fun of evolution, right? And I went, what? The Christianity I'm familiar with was evolution and Christianity were very compatible. I got very tickled with that because I found myself, I could not walk out. I wouldn't have walked out in the middle of a project anyway, but I kicked myself because I was like, I probably wouldn't have done it if I had realized it was an anti-evolution to me, that's anti-education. That's evolution is just, it's science. Doesn't mean there's no God by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. Why can't God, have a different way of doing it than you imagined? The Bibleman sets were always fun. They, for the most part, were very lovely to work for. They did not pay super well. Those guys weren't great on pay anyway. So it's usually like if you had some slow time and they only needed you for a couple of days, you'd go do it. And so the last time that they called me, I gave it to a friend, basically. I said, I can't do it, but I have a friend who would be awesome as Super Pro Game Master 3. And then I think the one time, and if you have affection for these, that's fine. But they artistically to me were a little bit not good. I think Mike is a good writer, so I don't think it was his fault. I don't know if it was just because they just didn't put quite enough money into the production value of them. Pete is the friend who actually lived with us for a while. My friend Pete came home one day because he had found one at a gas station, DVD at a gas station on their little thing. That was one of my episodes. And he brought it home and we put it on TV and I couldn't watch it. That's just honesty. Sorry. I hope that didn't burst any bubbles.
I mean, the funniest thing is that, especially over the last couple of years, people have been looking at Bibleman as this very unintentionally funny,
Yes.
cheap Christian production, especially on YouTube. So
that is good. I'm glad that that's the case because that's exactly, even at the time, I was like, wow, if you just put a little bit more money. The guy who played Bibleman's sidekick, and I can't remember what the character's name was.
Cypher?
Yes, he was awesome. And the girl that was also with him, but I don't remember her character's name.
Melody.
Yes, they both were amazing. They were super nice. Robert T. Schlepp, I hope that he has found himself. When people behave that way, when anytime an actor behaves that way, he did that to my buddy Pete. He wasn't nearly that awful when I worked with him, but he was a little full of himself. It was a little weird. I had worked with other famous people besides Robin Williams even. I have never had an encounter like this guy who walked in and acted like he was, well, I would have thought he was, the original actor playing that was Willie Ames. I would have thought he was Willie Ames. That may have been the way Willie Ames, because Willie Ames actually had some, notoriety as an actor outside of Bibleman. But no, it was a very bizarre experience because, they treated us very well. The studio was nice. I don't know what they were paying him. He was also doing a live show. And who knows, you never know what somebody else is going through. He may have been going through things in his life. And I will say this, he was probably all of 27 years old. He wasn't super old. So maybe he was still learning. I don't like to talk anybody down. I wish him well. But he definitely was not the greatest person to work with at that time. So that's kind of what my friend on the horror film set was. He was so excited because he said they were just so bad. And I was like, yeah, that's true. They really were. Well, you asked before about, doing bad plays. I'm sure that I did plays that other people thought were bad, even if I didn't think they were bad.
So with that, let's try to do a speed round of all of the stuff that I'm seeing on your resumes, just a sentence or two, just to round it out.
Sure.
Movie Second Chance. Character of Sonny.
That was brilliant. That's with Michael W. Smith and my buddy Jeff Obafemi Carr are the two leads in that. And I played Sonny. They never said what Sonny's deal was, except for that he was a man of limited intelligence. I opted to play him just exactly that way. He was just a really, really sweet soul who had limited intellectual abilities. The writers, the producers, they were trying to make that a series. They wanted to turn it into a series. It would have been a very good one. We shot that, I think, in 2003 or 4, but I can't remember which. Somewhere. It was in October. It was around my birthday. I missed my niece's wedding because I was on set for that. And I also choreographed the violence for that film, which I'm not sure if I'm credited or not, but there was only a couple of scuffles. So it was my first time ever doing, I'll put it in quotes, stunt work, because I'm by no means a stunt man by any means, but I did have quite a bit of stage combat experience, and combat for film is not much different. In fact, it's a lot more forgiving because you can absolutely not be anyways near someone's face, but if you angle the camera right, you can make it look like you are punching somebody right in the face. It was a pleasure. Anyway, that was more than 2 sentences, but Second Chance has a very special place in my heart. Michael W. Smith was wonderful to work with and for.
Prism, playing Detective, I'm going to butcher this name, Thibodeau.
Thibodeau. He was a Cajun, Detective Thibodeau. That was actually a filmmaker here in town. And I will say he's a film hobbyist more than a filmmaker. He was putting an effort. That's right when the digital technology was taking off, because I think it's one of the first digital projects I ever did. Technically, I guess, in the genre of horror. We shot that in Murfreesboro at, well, it was abandoned at the time, VA facility. It was spooky. I don't believe in ghosts, so I thought it was fun. But there were several people there that got really freaked out because it was a pretty small crew of about 20 with a cast that was not much larger than that. It was great fun shooting. I've always wanted to play a detective. The writing of it is a little was mysterious to me. Like I told you, I read a lot of scripts, and though I'm not really a writer, I know a lot about writing, and just from studying and being alive this long. So it was really interesting, to me that David Simmons brought me the script, and I said, yeah, I would do this. And we got paid. There was a very small budget, but they paid us for our time. Everybody in that film is a friend of mine. They're all people I've done plays with and stuff like that. So that was also great fun. I'm not a big horror genre guy, but I've sort of been turned into one because now I've got future employment and past employment recently with the horror genre with my friend Aaron Murtis, Mirtes, Murtis. He is a filmmaker that's close by here in Nashville. We hit it off immediately. We become friends. And so he and I are working. Well, he is writing a film adaptation of Pinocchio as a modern day horror film, which of course has been done. It's nothing new, but he's trying to really, really give it some finesse and some artistry. And so we are collaborating in the sense that the things he's writing I'm playing Geppetto. He is throwing me things like pages of script and stuff to get my feedback, which is awesome because it's a form of collaboration that I've always wanted to do with film. On my level, you don't usually get that kind of collaboration. It's something in theater, it's really only natural. You make friends with directors. So I've collaborated with directors for a long time. But in film, the hierarchy is different. And I will say this, every film set has a sort of different take on that hierarchy. And on some sets, the director is God. On other sets, it's a little more collaborative. I can work either way. The God thing is fine as long as they're sane. But I have worked for crazy people here and there too that, you have to put a buffer on that crazy sometimes. But yeah, Prison was great fun.
Brian of Blood Rogues.
Blood Rogues. Oh, well, so the same actor that was in Prison, who is an actor, a really, really good actor and a good friend of mine for many, many years, Jeremy Childs, best known probably for the series on AMC Preacher. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that one or not. It's Garth Ennis wrote the graphic novel Preacher. So Jeremy, this is something he wrote based on a play he had written called The Vampire Monologues. It was kind of supposed to be a take on the very popular annual play that a lot of theaters produce called The Vagina Monologues, which is, of course, a play celebrating women and documenting women's struggles. And Jeremy thought that was, he was a clever way of writing a play called The Vampire Monologues. My wife was in one of those iterations. I was never involved with it. But when they shot Blood Rogues, they shot it in the strip mall that's very close to my house. And I had one night, I played a guy who owned a pizza shop. I have never seen the film, and I don't know that it's viewable because he put that together with his girlfriend at the time, and I think they split the costs and they went into it. It wasn't a lot of money in film world, but it's a lot of money in people world. So, they were in the hole there for about $140,000 for a little while, but they broke up. And here's a lesson for any creatives. Get stuff in writing even when you love somebody and you're in a relationship with them. I might even say especially if you're in a relationship with them, because you never know. Because I think that's what kind of killed it. Lesson learned.
Still the King with Dowdy.
Still the King is a series that was on, who aired that? I can't remember now. That was on just for a few years. It had Billy Ray Cyrus starring another actor, Travis Nicholson. Travis has done some stuff. On the day I was on set, we shot down at Municipal Auditorium on a big stage that they had set up sort of like a rock and roll stage. I walked on set and asked if there was anything I need to know about Billy Ray Cyrus to the crew, because I knew the crew. It was a local crew. And in fact, one of the producers for that's a good friend of mine. Chris Connor is his name. I did not know he was a producer on that when I saw him on set. And I said, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I'm the producer. I went, oh, it's awesome. Anyway, I asked the question, is there any do's or don'ts that I need to know about with Billy Ray Cyrus? I really had no idea what he was like or whatever. And one of the people on the crew said, you're from Kentucky, right? And I said, yeah. And they go, just tell him you're from Kentucky. It'll be fine. So indeed, I went in and I met Billy Ray Cyrus, who is tremendously nice, by the way. I was playing, John Corbett was in it that episode, and John Corbett was the manager. I was John Corbett's manager. He was a rock and roll star. John Corbett, I don't know if you know, Sex and the City, My Big Fat Greek Wedding is what he's known for, I guess. I knew him from a series that my wife and I used to watch when we were courting back in the day, which was a show called Northern Exposure. Awesome show. Billy Ray Cyrus, and I walked in and I met Billy Ray Cyrus, and I shook his hand and I said, I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. And he grew up near Ashland. And actually, I figured out that I had snuck into a bar when I was 18. I told you I was a little bit of a get around. I snuck into a bar in Ashland, Kentucky to see his band play way back in the day, but long before Achy Breaky Heart and his having a very famous daughter. Still the King was awesome. I think they got 2 seasons here and employed a lot of my friends, both crew and actors, and it was awesome. Those same guys are working on another series that should be shot here soon. I don't know what it's called, but I'll keep you posted.
The Committee, Homeless Pete.
Oh, that is they're not the United Methodist Publishing House, but it's a Methodist station. Kingswood Productions is what they call themselves. It is an arm of the Methodist Church. And this was written and conceived by a really cool guy. His name won't come to me. But anyway, I was intrigued by this. I played Homeless Pete, who actually ends up being possibly God at the end of the series. This was written, it came out of a thing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or not, but Chuck Knows Church. The brother of Jeremy Childs is Josh Childs, who is Chuck in Chuck Knows Church. The Methodist Church was putting those out there because it was trying to make history up and make it a little more entertaining. So Josh is a very affable comedian, actor, really, really nice guy. And so they asked Josh to play Chuck. The spinoff, though, was the series The Committee, which was about the dilemma in modern American Christianity anyway, is a lot of churches that are in urban places. And the church we shot at was downtown Nashville here, and it absolutely was one of these churches where the congregations are fading away and dying out. And so they have these churches down there and they're trying to figure out they can't increase their congregants. And at the same time, there's homeless situation going on in downtowns everywhere. One of those things is homeless people sleeping on the steps of church, but not being invited into the church. So anyway, this series was written, I'm making it sound like it's about Homeless Pete. It's not. It's about the church itself and their struggles with that, being Christians, but also at the same time, in an urban area. And the attitude was they put a fence around the place and they were keeping the homeless people out. And I played Homeless Pete, who sat on the steps, and Chuck would walk by me and I would give him a piece of wisdom, or I'd quote the Bible, or I would ask for a beer, or all these different things. And I had to shoot it dressed as a homeless man downtown Nashville, which really felt weird sometimes because there would be actual homeless people walking by trying to figure out. The homeless people would walk by and think I was actually a homeless person. I would have to go, no, I'm an actor. Because, and they would look very confused sometimes. Anyway, that was a fabulous time and I loved it. I wish that series had kept going. It went for 3 seasons, though. Was a great little steady employment gig for me.
America's Dumbest Criminals Warrant Evader.
Oh, goodness. That's also too back in the day. I don't know if you guys ever saw that show. If you Google it, you could probably find some of the controversy surrounding it because the producers for that show, they did not screw me over. I got paid because I was union. They basically skipped town without paying a lot of people. That's the long and short of it. And the details are online if you're curious at all. That was also with the director, Steve Gilreath. And so while I was not a fan of the show much, it was absolutely fun. I didn't live in Nashville yet. I drove down from Kentucky, and that's how long ago that was. So I don't have a big memory of it because I was terrified driving in a huge city for the first time. And that's long before GPS, or I think I probably had a Google map maybe that I printed. But I got horribly lost in Nashville the night I shot that. And then we shot it. And yeah, I was a guy that the cops come to the door basically. And I think I tried to run and I don't succeed.
Ambush Lowry.
That's the very first film that I shot. The guy who made that film is a guy named Joseph Gray, an amazing man. It's about 3 guys who were in the Vietnam War and they've come together to bury a friend of theirs who has committed suicide. It took place in the present, so that would have been 1991. But I am not old enough to have been in Vietnam. And the reason I was cast is that I played a poser. What do they call it? Stolen valor now, I think is the term for it. That's the character I played. It was the very first film role I ever had. Absolutely one of the biggest film roles I ever had. We shot it in Somerset, Kentucky in the fall of 1991. It was a tremendous experience for me. I was there for 3 weeks. I was treated like royalty. I ate like a king. It was me and 2 other guys that were the leads in it, and they were actors that I knew and had worked with before. So that was really fun too. And it was the first time I got to really sink my teeth into a film role. And I had a lot of collaboration with the director. I knew him very well and got to know him even better. We worked really, really, really hard, but at the same time, they believed in playing and relaxing just as hard. That 3 weeks was a moment. It was right before I moved to New York City. It has a very dear place in my heart. It exists now. I think you can order it on Amazon, but he kind of intercut scenes from that film, which was I think it was only an hour and 15 minutes anyway. It wasn't quite feature length. So he did a series of interviews and intercut it and retitled it. And I can't remember the name of the retitlement. That was a long time ago. I was a very young man. I was 28 years old.
This one caught my eye because you played a man in an industrial film called Y2K under Stephen Yates Productions.
Yeah.
What can you tell me about that and also Stephen Yates Productions?
Well, Stephen Yates Productions, I can't tell you a whole lot about it. I shot a couple of things with him back in the day. That was in the early years of Nashville. So we're talking circa 1997 or so. Stephen Yates Productions produced a lot of religious type of material. In fact, the aforementioned anti-evolution film was produced by Stephen Yates. This one, though, was different. This Y2K film I don't think I even remember that being Stephen Yates. And I had forgotten I'd even done it. And I have no memory. This is one of those things that I go, wow, that was about 3 hours of my life on a Saturday when I was doing a play. I remember I had to figure out a window of time that I could do it. So everybody was worried. You guys weren't born yet, or you were barely born. Everybody, like starting about 1997, 98, people started freaking about Y2K, they weren't sure. I don't remember the exact details on the computer thing. You guys probably know it better than me if you've studied that history at all. They were very afraid that the computer software systems were going to crash because of the way computers work, computer code worked at that time anyway, of the update, of turning it into the 2000s. Everybody was afraid. I had a neighbor who actually sold his home and built a bunker up in the woods close by on the outskirts of Nashville because he was so afraid. He was a computer programmer and he was so afraid it was going to happen. In the real world, everything I read was saying, nah, probably not going to happen. Probably going to be just fine. And guess what? It was just fine. But this film was kind of built to exploit that, this short film that we did. So I had forgotten about it. Now, the reason I even tell you all of that is to tell you that the funniest thing to me, though, is it wound up on a clip of really bad films on some website. And a friend of mine found it and posted it to me on Facebook. And I laughed so hard because he said, "Is this you?" And he was absolutely watching Friends to laugh at all of the stuff. And he said, he's so funny that I popped up. And I said, I consider that a big badge of honor because it's cheesy. It's bad.
Well, there is a reason as to why I brought up this name, because Stephen Yates Productions was a name that sounds familiar to me personally, because I interviewed somebody by the name of Corey Edwards, who was involved with Big Idea Productions, and looking at his list of credits was none other than Stephen Yates Productions. So I think this is a possible VeggieTales connection.
Ah, yes. Corey Edwards, I know that name.
Corey Edwards was a writer. He wrote for many of the later episodes of VeggieTales. Also the writer, and I believe director, of Hoodwink.
That's awesome. It is a small world, and we're in the same area, so it would make sense. I've probably worked with Corey Edwards more than that even. Writers, sometimes you don't get to meet as an actor. But in theater, I've done a lot of original plays. And so my favorite part about that experience is I love it when the writer's present, because especially if they're a really good writer, and especially if there's collaboration going on.
Starting off, what would you say is your favorite music? What is your favorite band?
Favorite kind of music? That's so hard. Living in Nashville, when I moved down here, I didn't know a lot about country music. And I will say that country music, especially old country music, like from my era of childhood, has a very, very dear place in my heart. I do love a lot of old style. I'm talking Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, that kind of thing. But I also, too, I have a country music star living next door to me who moved in just a couple of years ago. Mickey Guyton. She's up and coming. She's the only Black female artist signed to a major country music label. So that being said, my favorite band in Nashville is a band called Old Crow Medicine Show, which plays what some people call old time. I thought it was bluegrass when I was first listening to it, but I had a friend correct me and say, no, it's old time. Bluegrass came from old time, basically. So I would say I'm a big bluegrass fan. I'm from the bluegrass states. It's not the music I grew up with. Outside of that, for popular bands, what do I like? Bruce Springsteen is the best as far as I'm concerned.
I was more referring to just like in general, whatever genre, but I guess that's close enough.
Genre, I gotta say, because I tell you what, I love young people and I love connecting to young people. So I will sometimes familiarize myself with some modern music or music that I'm not familiar with. Plus, like, I can't stand it when guys my age go, rap is awful, or something like that. Because I'm like, no, it's not. It's like any style of music has some good music. The only exceptions I might say would be like, I'm never very happy with really heavy metal. But, I've heard some Nine Inch Nails songs that are interesting and okay. I wasn't a huge fan of grunge, but still there's redeeming music from grunge. I mean, Nirvana is, you can't deny the impact of a band like that. This type of music, I mean, I love rock and roll. But here, I grew up, like I said, I grew up in the Methodist church. I like hymns. There's hymns that I would sing anytime anybody wants to sing them. I love musical theater. So I dabble in all those things. I don't know a whole lot about any of those genres, but I know enough just to make me dangerous. And I love music on the whole. When anybody ever tells me like if they crap on a genre, I will defend it almost every time. Even if it's metal, I will say, nah, there's still some, whatever, because it's such personal taste. But I like music that speaks to the heart. So anything, I like good music. That's what I always say too. But that could be just about any style. I started watching a show called Dave on Netflix. Are you guys familiar with it?
I'm not, at least for me.
A friend of mine recommended it to me, but it's all about rap and that world. And I don't know a lot about that world, but I enjoy listening to it. So there's that. I hope I didn't disappoint.
No, you didn't disappoint me. I think that answer was fair enough. But I see where you're coming from with you liking country, because I myself, I am a huge country guy because I grew up in a very country music household because we listen to a lot of Rascal Flatts.
Oh yeah, I love Rascal Flatts. Right now, the tour I'm doing is so country music centric, and my partner is an actor named Jenny Littleton. Jenny grew up here, and so she's backup sang for just about anybody you can name, any country music star you can name. And so she's performed on the Ryman stage over 100 times, probably. So on our tour, I play guitar a little bit and she sings, but we do a couple of like a little historical perspectives of where Rascal Flatts, the roots of Rascal Flatts would have come from. They sometimes pay homage to some of those old stars, the Hank Williams people in the era of the 60s and 70s that I'm more familiar with. People like to make fun of country music. Believe me, when I've traveled around, some people will really, crap all over country music, and I'll defend it with a passion. Well, especially when you tell them you're from Nashville and they go, oh, country music. And I'm like, well, actually, yes. That's one thing that really impressed me. And now, especially, we've had this spurt of growth here. We have musicians of every stripe you can name. My wife, the place where she was waiting tables a few years back, she had Jack White was a regular customer of hers. So, when we went out to California, and her sister is in New Zealand now, and she brought her kids up, and my wife had no idea how famous Jack White was. And I said, watch this. And I turned to the kids and I said, Evelyn, your aunt knows Jack White. And they went, what? They were freaking out. They had, no idea. So Nashville's one of those places that, music brings, and we also have all these mashups of genres too. Lady Gaga played a club, that's 2 miles from my house just a couple of years ago before the pandemic, and then hung out in the neighborhood. She did a song called Different Reasons. If you're a country fan, you hear that song. It has so much country in it. It's not funny. I love it.
With that being said, though, thank you so much, Mr. Haggard, for extending this interview with us for a really nice long episode.
Thank you. I do ramble. I am very appreciative that you guys are interested in talking to me. That's awesome. Urge you to treat old people always nice, and as this nice. You guys have been great. Thank you very much.
That's yet another interview in the books. I'd like to thank Henry Haggard for taking the time to share all of his fascinating stories. You can also get caught up to date with him on Instagram. Another huge thanks goes to Finn Corporated for helping us set up this amazing interview, and Reziel for joining along and for all of his research. And until then, we'll see you all on the next What's the Big Idea podcast.
Hello, I'm Chog Norrius, and you're listening to What's the Big Idea podcast.